The following program is presented by the National Committee on United States-China Relations, www.ncuscr.org.
When Alice called and we had the idea of this panel, it fit in perfectly with the annual meeting. We got latecomers. Fit in perfectly with the annual meeting. But everybody's got the biographies of the speakers, and everybody who knows China knows every one of the speakers, since they're all some of the greatest experts in their field. So what we're going to do, I'm not going to go over all their many accomplishments because you've got them right in front of you. But what we'll do, we've got some PowerPoint. We'll start off with Barry talking about the economic side. We'll then have Joe talk about the social implications of the economic downturn. We'll have Alice then talk about its effect on the Standing Committee and leadership politics, and then we'll have Cheng Li close with his view of what it means for the future, or what it means for the future of the Chinese leadership. But it's, again, they are so accomplished. We at the National Committee are thrilled to have them all here. They'll each speak for about 12 minutes, has been my instruction. I will ring the bell at 12 and then cut you off at 13, because then I'll ask some questions, and then you will all ask some questions, since we have an extraordinarily accomplished audience. In addition to extraordinarily accomplished panelists, we have a fabulous audience. So let me, with no further ado, we're ending at 6. We're going to have a reception between 6 and 6:30 across the hall. So let's turn it over.
Thank you, Steve. Indeed, there's an enormous amount of expertise in the room and a very rich panel following. So let me just really take my time to lay out what I see as some of the key economic developments that provide the foundation for many things that we'll be talking about in the course of the evening. Next slide, please. Let me start out with a minute or two. I guess I have to do that, don't I? All right. What do I point it at? There we go. Okay, there we go. Let me just start out taking a minute or two to give a little bit of background. I think this is material that pretty much everybody in this room knows, but quickly just to lay the foundation. Recall that before this global financial crisis erupted, China was going through an economic boom that had in it elements of an economic bubble. Remember that China's GDP growth, already spectacular over the last 30 years, was accelerating after 2001, and by the end of 2007, GDP growth was up in the range of 13%, absolutely dramatic, and that this growth was accompanied by an enormous expansion of industrial capacity. And nothing, I think, symbolizes that better than the simple fact of the enormous amount of steel that China produced in 2008, 585 million tons. Just remember that the United States in history has never produced more than 150 million tons of steel. So you get some sense of the magnitude of what's happening in China, but also the magnitude of this particular surge of production and output in China. This enormous boom was certainly real, but it had elements that were clearly unsustainable. Huge creation of capacity, overheating of the economy, inflation increasing throughout 2007 and the early part of 2008. And this whole process, this whole dramatic growth phase, driven by an absolutely a historically unprecedented expansion both of investment and of net exports. So China developed this incredible economy where more than 40% of GDP was going into investment, and net exports surged to 8% of GDP by 2007. Of course, this had the flip side of these numbers, is that consumption in China is, again, historically unprecedented low. Household consumption was only 35% of GDP in 2007. So you see that this tremendous surge of economic growth in China was purchased at the price of a set of very serious economic imbalances that cried out for a certain amount of rebalancing. Whatever else was going to happen in the rest of the world economy, China in 2008 was due for the beginning of a rebalancing process. Now, when 2008 started then, we saw a kind of a contest between the tremendous economic momentum that was created by this investment and export surge, increasingly, though, being offset by moderate contractionary policies that were being followed by the Chinese government and the Chinese central bank. So we saw the beginnings of significant RMB appreciation from November 2007 until mid-2008 that made a difference of about 11% vis-a-vis the U.S. dollar. We saw increased interest rates and an effort to curtail the credit supply, and we saw policies aimed at cooling the housing market. So when we think of the early part of 2008, of course it seems like ancient history now in a way, but still it's crucial to the current situation as well. We saw this attempt by the Chinese government to rein in this overly rapid, excessively rapid growth of the economy. And what we saw in the beginning of 2008 with these policies starting to have an effect, slowing the economy a little bit, and then gradually as 2008 rolled on, suddenly the change in global economic circumstances combined with the lag effects in Chinese domestic policy led to a very, very dramatic slowdown of the Chinese economy that was initially domestic. All right. Now, I've put on the screen for you here one indicator. There are many different indicators we could use, but I want to use this one because it's very forward-looking. It's the Purchasing Managers Index. And what you can see with this index is that right in the middle of 2008, after many, many months in which Chinese businessmen were universally optimistic about the growth of the economy, Chinese economy hit a very, very dramatic slowdown right in the middle of 2008. In July 2008, Chinese economic policy pivoted, going from a contractionary bias to a shift towards concern about sustaining growth within the course of just a few weeks. Why? Because domestic economic conditions were deteriorating extremely rapidly. This deterioration in domestic conditions was then very closely followed within a couple or 3 months by a deterioration in external economic conditions as well. You can see when we look at exports and imports, and by the way, all these figures are updated through the current data, so you can also be scoping out some of the things that's happening in the most recent months. But what you see is that it was not until October 2008 then that China's export growth started to slow very, very dramatically, and then after January dropped significantly into large negative territory. Now, why is this background so important? The background is important because in November 2008, Chinese leaders met, and based on the information they had in front of them at that time, they recognized that the economy faced a really dramatic challenge with a simultaneous domestic and external slowing. And so when Chinese leaders met on November 5th, 2008, they produced a stimulus plan. This stimulus plan, you've all heard of it, the 4 trillion renminbi stimulus plan. Ever since that day, the Chinese have been talking about this stimulus plan. But the first reaction of external commentators to this stimulus plan was that it was less than it appeared to be. It was underspecified, it was underfunded, and it was in general a very large number that had been put together in a very short time. But what we found out since that time is that the stimulus plan was not less than it appeared to be. It was, in fact, more than it appeared to be. And I'd like to explain to you the reason why. The stimulus plan that the Chinese government presented in November and has revised several times since was the best face of a set of policies that were designed to do 2 things simultaneously. They were designed to increase investment because that was the lever that the Chinese government could activate most quickly. And they were designed to increase consumption, but only in the long run, as the types of investment that were carried out followed through and contributed to a more secure economic environment and a better environment for consumption as well. So when you look at the specific components, and this gives all the different revisions of the plan, I've stripped out the earthquake reconstruction because that's not really part of the stimulus plan. But what you see is a great deal of money is now going for low-income housing,